Night in Salvador walks with a storyteller's hush, and the house at the bend of the old hill listens harder than the rest. Blue tiles drink the moonlight, shutters quiver like eyelids holding back sleep. Locals call it the House of the Seven Deaths, though no one agrees on who the seventh might be, or whether seven was simply a number chosen to keep curiosity afraid. The facade shows little, a modest mask. The body hides behind it, breathing around a courtyard where stone remembers more than it will say. If you stand on the cobbles at dawn, you can hear water somewhere inside, not flowing, but rocking. A ceramic sigh, the echo of a bath that cooled a long time ago. A lamp flickers behind an upstairs grill. A door that should be locked sighs open, and nothing comes out except colder air dressed in soap and iron. The city wakes with drums, gulls, motorbikes and prayer, yet here the morning feels like a room that someone left mid-sentence. 7 is a story's promise. 7 is a ledger. 7 is a knot someone tied to keep a truth from slipping into daylight. People pass quickly, muttering that the address changes its weight from hour to hour. Tour guides point, then hurry on. Vendors cross themselves without breaking stride. The house does not argue. It creaks, it tightens, it loosens. In the afternoon, the courtyard tiles warm like skin. After midnight, the galleries sweat a sweet humidity that tastes of salt and copper. There are nights when a choir rehearses down the street, and their notes arrive wrong here, as if slowed by an unseen hand, as if measured against a different clock. That is when the counting begins, not out loud but in the bones. 1 footstep, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and a pause that refuses to end. If you crave stories where history and haunting walk together, tap like, follow, and tell me what you feel standing at this door. They say the number comes from an account book that was never found, from a court record that's smudged in the rain, from a priest's last breath that miscounted the living as if they had already left. They also say it was a mischief of language. 7 knives, 7 rooms, 7 debts. Any of these could have melted into deaths in the mouths of neighbors and travelers. In one telling, a household awoke to metallic birdsong and discovered 4 bodies cooling on red tile. The 5th, 6th, and 7th were not bodies at all, but absences, people who fled and were mourned as if buried. In another, poison moved through a family like a prayer said backward, quiet, devoted, and final. There is also the sweeter rumor that a freed worker paid his freedom twice, once in coin, once with silence, and that silence bought 3 more lives no ledger would admit. Every version has a flaw that sags at the same place, at the threshold between provable and felt. What survives is the architecture, a narrow face on the street, a deep lung of a courtyard, galleries that turn sound into a necklace of small echoes, a bath that remembers shells and warm skin, stair treads with a notch where someone paced. The house insists on evidence in the way a witness does when the trial is already over. It stands, it points with its corners, it refuses to forget which way the blood went. And yet, after sunset, there comes a different testimony. A window filling with a shape that may be a woman or only a tax on the eye paid by the dark. A whisper that smells like soap. A pewter thud neither upstairs nor below. The city carries on. Inside, the tally whispers 7. The house nods and does not correct anyone. To understand the house, one must first understand Salvador itself, a city built on layers, each a sediment of faith, sugar, and silence. The cobblestones of Rua do Paso bleed into the sea. Footsteps there have carried processions, slaves, lovers, and soldiers. Above them, the Casa das Sete Mortes sits like a tooth in an old jaw, chipped but still biting into time. Records say the house belonged to Father Manuel de Almeida in the mid-18th century, a man of discipline and possessions, a bathtub inlaid with shells, curtains from Lisbon, servants who walked softer than dust. But in that same year, 1755 or 1756, depending on the archivist, the house swallowed its peace. Neighbors spoke of screams smothered by thunder, of a door bolted too late, of a bell that rang though the priest's hand never reached its rope. When the constables entered the next morning, they found 4 bodies cooling in the courtyard. Father Almeida, his attendant, and 2 enslaved people whose names evaporated in ink. The rumor of 7 deaths came later, an infection of imagination perhaps, or an instinct that what was seen did not equal what was lost. What matters is that from that morning on, no one who lived there stayed long. Leases shortened, heirs sold quickly, even priests refused to bless its walls twice. The house stood alone, breathing faintly, while the city grew around it like coral. To walk past it today is to feel a narrowing of sound. The traffic thins, the air folds, and for a second, the centuries align. Something still counts, softly behind the walls, as though the building itself rehearses memory. If the unknown draws you in, if places that remember what people forget haunt your thoughts, don't forget to like, follow, and share what you believe hides inside these walls. Time has a way of rephrasing guilt into architecture. The cracks along the ceiling might be the city's wrinkles, but they also trace the shape of what it once refused to speak. During the 19th century, when Bahia prospered from sugar and despair, the Casa das Sete Mortes became lodging for sailors, then a boarding house, then a silence with a roof. A caretaker once claimed to hear the floorboards breathing. Another said he woke to find all the windows open, though the latches were rusted shut. Yet none of these accounts reached the newspapers. They lived in rumor, traded in market stalls with the same rhythm as gossip about politics or saints. Then, in 1936, the house was given to the Casa Pia, an orphanage that accepted it as charity and curse alike. Workers repairing the plumbing unearthed bones in the courtyard well. 3 human, 1 animal, all discolored by lime. The authorities dismissed them as historic refuse, but one foreman refused to return. He said the bones hummed when touched, a low vibration like breath drawn through water. After that, the orphanage sealed the well and built a garden over it, where bougainvillea still thrives as if nourished by memory. Children were told not to play near the back wall. Still at night, some swore they heard counting, 6, 7, over and over, until a nun came to hush them with prayer. To outsiders, the house looked reborn, its colonial arches restored, its whitewash clean. But anyone who stayed long enough felt something else beneath the paint. An unfinished sentence murmuring beneath every stare. Some visitors claim that each renovation only wakes the sleeping corners, that every nail driven into its beams echoes back from somewhere older than the city itself. And in that echo, the 7th death still waits to be named. The courtyard is the heart of the house, a square of light surrounded by shadow, where time seems reluctant to move. Moss creeps over the tiles like old handwriting. The air carries a faint smell of lye, though no one remembers the last time anyone scrubbed these stones. It's here, locals say, that the murders occurred. 4 bodies, all arranged in a kind of geometry, heads turned toward the same corner, where the rain now collects. Yet this geometry hides something, a pattern repeated in each retelling. Some witnesses spoke of 5 shadows, not 4, lingering after the constables removed the dead. One man, a shoemaker who lived across the street, insisted he saw a figure watching from the gallery. Pale, unmoving, its hands on the rail. The police dismissed him, but his testimony lives in archives written in cramped script. A presence undefined. That phrase has outlived them all. Over the years, every attempt to explain the mystery leads back to the courtyard, as if the stones themselves wish to confess. Historians read the space like a wound, open, circular, refusing to close. Paranormal investigators bring their instruments, EMF readers, thermometers, recorders. They leave with more questions than answers. The devices capture soft murmurs, fluctuating temperatures, even what one specialist called a mechanical heartbeat. But whether the house breathes with guilt or grief, no one agrees. At night, when the moon slips through the lattice, the shadows fall perfectly across the spot where the blood once dried. Some say they see it still, a faint shimmer, like oil on water, like the echo of a crime unwilling to fade. If stories where evidence and imagination collide fascinate you, like and share. Let others decide whether these shadows belong to the living or the dead. Architecturally, the Casa das Sete Mortes is a contradiction. Modest at its front, labyrinthine within. Its galleries twist in improbable ways. One passage narrows to the width of a single shoulder, forcing visitors to turn sideways, as if humbled by the walls. A hidden staircase leads to an attic with no windows, only a vent in the ceiling through which dust glows like suspended souls. There is also the famous bath, the shell-inlaid tub Father Almeida imported from Portugal, said to shimmer faintly under moonlight. Locals say the priest died beside it, his hand on the rim, his eyes open to the reflection of nothing. When the restoration team uncovered it in 2010, they found the tiles around it cracked, the grout discolored by something darker than time. One of the workers, a man named Jose Ramos, told reporters that the smell in that room was too human, and that when he turned to leave, he felt someone grip his arm. No mark appeared, but he quit the next day and refused to pass the street again. Architectural students who study the building call it a spatial riddle, a structure that seems to shift depending on how you move through it. Measurements never quite match the blueprints. Rooms feel larger or smaller depending on who enters. Some believe the house absorbs those who linger, not by trapping them physically, but by reshaping their sense of space, of distance, of certainty. A professor once joked, "It's the only building in Bahia where geometry believes in ghosts." Yet beneath the laughter there is unease, because every attempt to understand its design ends in the same corner of the courtyard, where footsteps echo twice, once for those who walk, and once for those still trying to leave. Among the few documents that survive the centuries, one letter stands apart, a torn page found in a Jesuit archive, written in careful but trembling Portuguese. It is believed to be Father Almeida's final correspondence, dated just days before his death. In it he complains of voices between the walls and of candles that refuse to die. He speaks of a servant named Thomas who vanished without farewell, leaving behind a rosary tangled in a door latch. "The house prays without words," he writes. "I fear it will soon say, 'Amen' for me." Historians argue over its authenticity. Some call it a forgery written long after the murders. Others insist the ink and phrasing match 18th century clerical style. Still, the letter's tone feels too personal, too desperate to dismiss. Its last line chills even the skeptics. "If I must confess, let it be here, to the house that listens better than heaven." When read aloud inside the house today, the echo lingers unnaturally long, like a voice unwilling to stop. Priests have blessed the rooms repeatedly, yet each blessing seems to fade before it reaches the courtyard. A current priest, Father Vicente, once admitted privately that he avoids entering after dusk. "It's not evil," he said. "It's memory, memory that learned to breathe." Even skeptics hesitate at that phrasing. What if the walls themselves remember the weight of every confession, every plea, every dying word? The letter suggests that Father Almeida was not simply a victim, but perhaps a participant, an unwilling host to something larger, a guilt that could not be washed from stone. If stories where faith and fear blur into the same prayer intrigue you, follow for more. The house has many confessions, yet unheard. Legends multiply where facts decay. By the late 1800s, locals had turned the Casa das Sete Mortes into a story told to frighten children and tourists alike. One version spoke of a forbidden romance between the priest and a widow named Donna Catarina, whose jealousy drove her to poison his household. Another claimed that enslaved workers rose against their master and were executed, their bodies buried beneath the foundation. Hence the name, 7 Deaths, for 7 rebels. Yet another told that 7 priests once gathered there to exorcise something not human and that none survived the night. Each tale contradicts the next, yet they all agree on one thing: the house punishes those who try to explain it. A local historian named Geraldo Barbosa once published an essay arguing that the story was entirely metaphorical, a moral allegory about colonial guilt and social decay. He spent 3 nights inside the house to prove his point. On the 4th morning, neighbors found him wandering the street barefoot, unable to speak, his notes torn to ribbons. He later wrote only one more line before vanishing from public life. The number 7 is not a count, it's a rhythm. Psychologists labeled it exhaustion. Believers called it proof. Whatever happened, the house gained another silence to guard. Since then, every researcher who enters carries 2 notebooks, one for facts, one for what the night teaches. Tourists take selfies by its blue doors, laughing nervously, unaware that they stand where 7 breaths may still mingle with theirs. And the city, ever alive with drums and prayer, lets the legend breathe because it needs its ghosts to remember itself. There is a strange consistency among those who have spent time alone in the Casa das Sete Mortes. Each reports the same sound. It is not a moan, nor the creak of timber, nor the rustle of wind. It is a slow dripping, though no leak has ever been found. Visitors describe it as like water remembering how to fall. Paranormal researchers have tried to trace it with recording devices, but the sound vanishes when approached, returning only when the listener retreats. Some claim it comes from the old bath. Others insist it comes from the courtyard well, sealed since 1936. A geologist once suggested underground water movement, yet when measurements were taken, no aquifer lay beneath. Whatever its origin, the dripping carries rhythm, deliberate as counting. 1, 2, 3, always stopping at 6, then silence, dense, expectant, heavy as the pause between lightning and thunder. The 7th drop never falls. Those who hear it say that is the moment the temperature changes, that a faint scent of soap or candle wax fills the air. Sometimes they feel watched, not with malice, but with patience, as if something invisible awaits acknowledgement. The sound has become a metaphor among Salvador's poets, who write of the 7th drop as the moment truth chooses not to reveal itself. For locals, it is simply another whisper in a city that sings with ghosts. But for those who stand long enough in that courtyard, head tilted to the unseen rhythm, the experience is unmistakable. An invitation to listen to what the past has refused to say. If mysteries that hide in sound and silence call to you, follow this story and share what you think the 7th drop might be. In 2010, when the government restored the building to preserve it as historical heritage, workers documented every corner, every beam, every trace of lime and mold. Yet their photographs revealed something no one could explain. In multiple images, faint figures appeared near the bath and the upper gallery. At first, these were dismissed as reflections or digital errors, until one technician noticed that the silhouettes shifted position between frames, though no one had entered the rooms. A video captured during the restoration shows a door moving gently, though all windows were shut. The footage circulated briefly online before being removed. Officials feared the site would attract thrill seekers instead of historians. Some who worked on the restoration reported recurring dreams afterward, of walking through corridors that turned endlessly, of voices asking for candles. One restorer, Maria Tavares, confessed that she often smelled iron and jasmine when reviewing her photographs. "It felt like being remembered by something that shouldn't know my name," she said in an interview later censored from the project's archives. Yet despite these incidents, the restoration continued, as if the city itself willed the past to be reopened. When the final scaffolds came down, the facade gleamed again under Salvador's sun. White, silent, deceptively pure. Tourists admired its rebirth, but locals murmured that the paint only sealed the spirits inside, the way one buries an unconfessed secret under holy water. Today, the house stands immaculate, but every so often, when night presses against its walls, the new paint seems to ripple, as though the house breathes beneath it, still counting, still waiting for someone to ask who truly died there, and why the number never stops at 4. The house's location itself feels deliberate, as though chosen by geometry rather than chance. Perched between the Church of Paso and the incline that leads toward the Bay of All Saints, it sits on a threshold of the sacred and the profane. From its balconies, one can see both the cross atop the church and the glimmer of water where slaves once disembarked, their chains echoing faintly across centuries. The building seems to inhale both worlds, sanctity and sorrow, and breathe them back as legend. Architects have long remarked on how the design mirrors certain Jesuit monasteries of the 1600s, high ceilings to let the spirit rise, narrow stairs to humble the body. But there are deviations, curves too fluid, alcoves with no purpose, doors leading to walls. It's as if the house was built by someone who knew the rules of sacred architecture, but chose to misapply them, weaving symmetry and distortion together like a psalm sung out of tune. Some believe these choices were not mistakes but codes, symbols of guilt, penitence, or secret worship. One pattern repeats across the tiles, a 7-petaled flower, painted in cobalt, placed precisely where footsteps echo most. Restoration experts call it a decorative motif, but among esoteric circles in Salvador, it's said that the symbol marks where blood once fell. A coincidence, perhaps. Yet when the evening light hits those tiles, their blue deepens into violet, the color of morning. Standing there, a person might feel a subtle vibration through the soles of their feet, as if the ground itself murmurs prayers for those forgotten. And so, every theory, religious, architectural, or supernatural, ends the same way. The house remains its own priest, its own sinner, its own confession booth of stone and silence. If you believe buildings can remember, share this story. The house is listening even now. In the archives of Bahia's Historical Institute lies an inventory of the house's contents after Father Almeida's death. A brass crucifix, 2 candlesticks, a Portuguese Bible, 1 shell-inlaid bathtub, and objects of minor worth. But scholars noticed a gap in the list. Numbers 5 and 6 were omitted, replaced with a horizontal line. That single omission has become the heartbeat of speculation. Some claim it was merely a clerical error. Others suspect that whatever was hidden between those numbers was deliberately erased. In whispers, people mention a mirror, oval, framed in silver, that once hung above the bathtub and which vanished after the murders. According to rumor, the mirror reflected not the room, but the face of the next to die. When restorers searched for it centuries later, they found a faint oval stain on the wall, perfectly smooth amid the surrounding decay. In certain light, the patch seems to pulse faintly, as if the wall itself remembers the missing glass. Theories abound. Perhaps the mirror was taken by church officials, or perhaps it was buried with the priest. Yet, when one archaeologist attempted to dig beneath the courtyard tiles in 2012, his equipment failed without explanation. Batteries drained, compass spinning uselessly. He left muttering that something did not wish to be uncovered. Even today, visitors report seeing brief flashes of silver light in the upper hallways, like moonlight where there is no window. Children call it the priest's mirror, a playful name for something far less gentle. No one has ever managed to capture it on camera, but many have tried, and every attempt ends with corrupted files or distorted images. Whatever truth lies behind that missing object, it seems the house keeps its reflections for itself. As night falls, the Casa das Sete Mortes transforms from a relic of history into something breathing, sentient, quietly aware. The city's noise fades, music from nearby bars, laughter, car horns, and in their place comes a dense stillness that feels like listening. Those who have stayed within its walls after midnight describe a subtle pressure in the air, as if the building itself leans closer. Lights dim unpredictably, and a low hum travels through the floor. Some say it's the sound of the sea filtered through the city's bones. Others whisper it's the murmuring of those who never left. Even skeptics find themselves whispering, compelled by the weight of silence. The rooms seem to change shape under the moonlight, corners appearing where none existed, doorways narrowing until breath catches. Visitors sometimes report the faint scent of burning incense mixed with something metallic, blood perhaps, or rust. One historian, spending a single night to record environmental readings, noted that the temperature dropped sharply at exactly 3:07 a.m., remaining cold for 7 minutes before returning to normal. He joked about the punctual ghosts of Bahia, but his hands trembled in the footage he left behind. When he reviewed his audio files, he found a whisper beneath the hum of insects, an indistinct voice repeating one word: Espera. Wait. For what? No one knows. Some say it's the seventh soul, still counting, still patient. Others believe the house itself speaks through that word, urging those inside to listen longer. After all, what is haunting if not memory asking to be heard one more time? If you've ever felt the air change around you for no reason at all, you already understand this house. Like, follow and tell me. What do you think it's waiting for? The story of the Casa das Sete Mortes reached beyond Salvador, carried by travelers and writers who could not resist its symmetry of tragedy. In the 1950s, a Brazilian novelist named Heitor Vasconcelos rented a room there, hoping to capture the city's colonial atmosphere for a historical novel. What he captured instead was fear. His notes from that period, published posthumously, describe a whisper that writes when I sleep. He claimed his drafts changed overnight, words rearranging into sentences he did not recall composing. One passage, written entirely in Latin, read, "Quae septem fuerunt, unum factum est." What was 7 has become 1. Scholars debated whether this was literary flourish or madness, but Vasconcelos abandoned the manuscript and disappeared 2 years later in Recife. The unfinished novel's last line reads, "The house has learned to read me." Since then, writers and artists have used the Casa das Sete Mortes as muse and menace alike. Painters obsessed with repeating its geometry, poets hearing 7 beats in every verse. A theater troupe once staged a play about it inside the courtyard. On opening night, the lead actress fainted mid-sentence, claiming she saw a second audience watching from the shadows. Afterward, she refused to perform there again. The legend thrives precisely because it feeds on those who try to define it. Every attempt to turn the house into art seems to awaken something older, as though it resents being imagined. And so the story repeats itself. 7 deaths, 7 tellings, none final, all incomplete. By the 1970s, the Casa das Sete Mortes had become both tourist curiosity and forbidden ground. Photographers wandered its halls, drawn by the interplay of shadow and age, yet few stayed long enough to finish their work. One photojournalist, Luis Andrade, recounted that his camera shutter jammed every time he tried to capture the upper gallery. When he finally succeeded, the developed image showed faint outlines behind the banister. 3 figures, transparent, gazing downward. Andrade dismissed it as double exposure, yet burned the negative anyway. "Some frames don't belong to us," he later wrote. During this era, rumors spread of a particular window that could not be closed. Every night it opened slightly, no matter how tightly latched, as if the house required a single breath of the outside. Locals began leaving small offerings, candles, bread, rum on its sill, adopting a tradition older than their understanding. Street musicians claimed their songs changed key when played nearby, descending into minor chords without conscious choice. Even birds avoided nesting on the roof, circling once before drifting toward the sea. Still, the house endured, unclaimed and untamed. Some preservationists argued it should be demolished for safety, but protests erupted from residents who saw destruction as blasphemy. "You don't erase a prayer because it frightens you," said an elderly woman from the neighborhood. So the house remained, sealed off but undefeated, its blue facade fading gently like a bruise. It became part of Salvador's living folklore, as essential as its churches and festivals. Yet beneath the laughter of carnival, in those nights when drums echo through the streets, one can still glimpse its darkened silhouette, a silent counterpoint to celebration, a reminder that joy and terror often share the same heartbeat. If places could dream, what do you think this house sees when the music outside never stops? Share your thoughts below. Every haunting has a pattern, and in the Casa das Sete Mortes, that pattern is time. Events seem to repeat at fixed intervals. Shadows walking at the same hour, lights flickering in sequence, whispers rising with each new moon. In 1992, a team of parapsychologists from São Paulo conducted a week-long study using motion sensors and thermal cameras. They detected temperature shifts that aligned perfectly with the city's tide schedule. "It's as if the sea still breathes through the stones," one researcher wrote. The most startling event occurred on the sixth night. A door slammed with such force that plaster cracked along the archway. When they reviewed the recordings, they heard faint footsteps crossing the floor just before the impact, though the infrared footage showed nothing. Interestingly, the noise repeated exactly 7 minutes later, softer, deliberate, almost ritualistic. Some called it coincidence, others communication. Local Umbanda practitioners visited afterward, performing rituals meant to balance the house's rhythm. They described the energy not as malevolent, but unfulfilled, something caught between prayer and confession. Their ceremony ended in silence so profound that even the insects outside seemed to pause. For 3 nights after, the lights of the nearby street lamp flickered in sync with no wind to blame. To the locals, it was proof that the ritual worked. To scientists, an unsolved electrical fault. Yet those who live nearby say the house now sleeps lighter, no longer heavy with breath, but waiting, as if its rhythm has changed key again, searching for a final chord that refuses to arrive. In Salvador's spiritual landscape, where Catholicism, candomblé, and folklore interlace, the Casa das Sete Mortes stands as a perfect intersection of faiths. Candomblé priestesses, Mayas de Santo, say the house is not haunted but guarded. To them, the 7 deaths are not a curse but a covenant, sealing the property as a crossroads between worlds. 7, after all, is sacred to Oxosi, guardian of the hunt and of paths. It also echoes the 7 lines of Yemanjah's waves. One priestess, Mai Clarice, once led a cleansing ritual there, leaving offerings of water, honey, and white flowers at each threshold. She later claimed she saw shadows moving in rhythm with her chant, not dark, but luminous like heat. Afterward, she told the press that the house remembers its pain but no longer suffers it. Her words infuriated church officials who insisted no spiritual work was to be performed on consecrated ground. Yet even the clergy admit the paradox. The boundary between holiness and haunting blurs easily in Bahia. Perhaps the house feeds on this tension, the prayers of the devout, the songs of the faithful, the fear of the skeptical. Historians studying her account found that each offering Mine Clarice placed corresponded precisely to the rooms where deaths were reported. How she knew, no one can say. In the years since, some claim the house feels calmer, the air lighter, though its mystery persists. It no longer frightens as it once did, but now seems to observe, patient, alive. The seventh death, some say, was never a person at all, but the death of peace, sealed and eternal within its walls. If you believe some places hold both blessings and ghosts, follow and share, because in Bahia, the sacred and the haunted often speak the same language. In the heat of summer, when the air over Salvador ripples like glass, the house seems to shimmer as though underwater. Tour guides pointed out to visitors making their way up the Ladera do Paso, often lowering their voices instinctively. Most tourists laugh, take photos, move on, but a few linger, sensing something heavier than the humid air. One traveler from Argentina described hearing soft chanting when he placed his hand on the facade, like a church choir behind a wall. Another claimed her phone recorded whispers when she filmed the courtyard, though no one else heard them in the moment. Perhaps these are tricks of heat, of expectation, of minds primed for mystery. Yet even skeptics feel an odd pressure there, a slight dizziness that fades once they leave the property. Physicists might speak of magnetic fields or subterranean acoustics, but locals simply shrug and say, the house chooses who to speak to. Its effect is subtle, psychological rather than dramatic, a sense of being observed not by eyes but by awareness itself. The house neither threatens nor welcomes. It studies. Those who listen closely sometimes describe a faint echo of ocean waves, though the sea lies far below the hill. Some say that is the heartbeat of Yemanja herself, reminding Salvador that memory, like tidewater, always returns. And when night falls again, when the lanterns of Pelourinho glow and the drums begin, the Casa das Sete Mortes waits in silence, its windows reflecting not the revelers, but something older, patient, infinite, perhaps the truth itself, waiting for the courage to be seen. Few buildings have inspired as many investigators as the Casa das Sete Mortes. Paranormal teams, theologians, skeptics, even psychologists have all tried to measure its mystery. One of the most detailed accounts comes from 2004, when a group of university researchers attempted to document the psychological influence of haunted architecture. They installed motion detectors, barometers, and audio recorders, planning to stay 7 consecutive nights. The first 2 nights were uneventful: humidity, echoes, occasional bats. But on the third, at 2:14 a.m., one recorder captured a sudden spike in low-frequency sound, too deep for human ears, too structured to be random. When analyzed, the sound pattern revealed a series of pulses forming a rhythm: 6 beats, pause, 6 beats, pause. Curiously, the pauses always measured 7 seconds. Some believed it to be machinery interference, but the building had no electricity at that time. On the final night, 2 members of the team refused to enter, citing nausea and dizziness the moment they approached the courtyard. The project's report, later published anonymously, concluded that the phenomenon suggests intentional resonance, a phrase that no one has yet explained. Whatever that resonance was, it seemed to follow the lead researcher, Dr. Afonso Mendes, long after the study ended. He claimed to hear the same rhythm in his own apartment, faint but persistent, every night before sleep. 3 months later, he left academia without explanation. The others never spoke publicly again. Whether coincidence or consequence, their silence added one more thread to the fabric of the house's legend. Proof, perhaps, that the haunting extends beyond its walls. If you think some mysteries choose their witnesses, share this story, because once the house finds your rhythm, it may never let go. Over the centuries, residents of the neighborhood have adapted to living beside the House of Seven Deaths. Children grow up with its shadow, daring each other to touch its door, to whisper their names through the keyhole. Some say that those who do hear faint laughter echo back, not cruel, but distant, as though from another century. Older residents, however, warn against mocking the house. They tell stories of lost keys, strange illnesses, sudden storms. One old man named Sebastian swore that the weather itself changes when the house is disrespected. "Call it cursed," he said, "and the rain will come." Indeed, several locals recall unseasonal downpours following vandalism attempts. Once, a tourist carved his initials into the outer wall. 2 hours later, lightning struck the street's lamppost, blowing its fuse. Coincidence, perhaps, but enough to reinforce the belief that the house defends itself. Today, the locals have adopted a quiet ritual. When they pass, they nod, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than fear. Some even greet it aloud, "Boa noite, casa," as if addressing an elder. And maybe that's what it is now. Not a haunted ruin, but an ancient listener, a presence so woven into Salvador's story that ignoring it feels like forgetting one's own blood. For them, the legend has become coexistence. The house no longer frightens, it watches, protecting its own silence. And as long as the seventh death remains unnamed, the city continues to live beside it, aware that some stories do not end. They simply stand, century after century, counting quietly in the dark. There are nights when the bay mist climbs the hill and swallows the street in a gauze of white. Those who pass the Casa das Sete Mortes at such hours say the house seems to dissolve into that fog, its edges blurring, its windows vanishing, until only its outline remains, a memory of itself. In these moments, time feels suspended, and even the city's relentless music fades away. It is said that if you stand before the door then, you might glimpse the priest's silhouette through the haze, moving from one gallery to another, candle in hand. The light flickers 7 times before extinguishing, leaving behind the faint sound of water dripping from the bathtub upstairs. One night, a taxi driver named Paulo stopped nearby to check his tires. Through the fog, he saw a woman in colonial dress walking slowly toward the church, her gown glimmering faintly. She turned to him, nodded once, and disappeared. Paulo drove away shaking, convinced he had seen a ghost. But the following morning, he found a damp handprint on his passenger window. Delicate, unmistakably real. He never returned to that street after dark. Some say what he saw was not a ghost, but a memory replaying itself. A trace of emotion burned into the air like a photograph that refuses to fade. The fog, they say, is how the house dreams, projecting its past into the living world for a few heartbeats before the dawn claims it again. If you've ever felt that certain nights belong more to memory than to time, follow this story. The mist may remember more than we do. The relationship between the house and the sea has always been intimate, though they stand apart. Sailors once claimed that during heavy storms, the wind carried cries from the direction of the Casa das Sete Mortes, echoing across the bay like the wails of shipwrecked souls. Fishermen avoided casting their nets near the shore opposite the street, insisting that the sea there listens too closely. In Candomblé belief, Yemanja, goddess of the sea, protects her devotees but punishes those who disturb her waters unjustly. Some devotees whisper that the 7 deaths were offerings gone wrong, a ritual meant to appease Yemanja that turned into tragedy. When the tide is high and the moon full, locals swear the waves mirror the shape of the house's windows, 7 crests folding upon themselves before breaking. Scientists call it coincidence, yet anyone who has stood by the bay on such a night feels otherwise. The air thickens with the smell of salt and jasmine, the same scent reported by workers in 2010. A legend now claims that on the anniversary of the murders, the sea rises higher than usual, as if trying to reach the house again, to reclaim what was once hers. Whether myth or pattern, the connection endures, water and stone, both shaped by time, both unwilling to forget. Those who live nearby often say, "The sea built that house as surely as men did." And perhaps they're right. For when the tide recedes at dawn, the streets glisten as though the ocean has wept its memory through the city itself. In recent years, new technologies have given investigators more tools, but fewer answers. Drones have mapped the Casa das Sete Mortes in 3D, scanners have measured every brick, and yet the data reveals irregularities impossible to explain. Measurements shift by millimeters between each scan, as if the structure subtly rearranges itself overnight. Digital mapping experts first blamed humidity, then interference. But one technician, reviewing frames from a thermal camera, noticed 7 cold spots moving independently across the courtyard floor. They formed a circle, pulsing faintly before fading into uniform warmth. The footage was analyzed frame by frame. No insects, no drafts, no reason. Some researchers suggested it was a memory imprint, a residual energy recorded in the material itself. Others preferred silence. When questioned, the lead engineer simply said, "It's like the house is alive, but not in a way biology understands." The incident drew attention from international paranormal communities, yet local authorities restricted access soon after, citing preservation concerns. Since then, the house has become almost impossible to enter without permission. Still, curious souls linger outside its gates, smartphones raised, hoping to glimpse what technology cannot fix in pixels. Ironically, the more instruments are pointed at the mystery, the more it eludes capture. Some even claim that digital devices behave strangely near it. GPS signals drop, clocks desynchronize by seconds, files corrupt spontaneously. It's as if the house rejects translation into code, preserving its story in the one medium still untouchable by algorithms: the imagination. If you believe some truths vanish the moment they're measured, follow this journey. The House of 7 Deaths still refuses to exist entirely in our world. Not all encounters with the Casa das Sete Mortes are terrifying. Some who have entered describe a strange serenity, as though stepping into the pause between 2 breaths. A French historian named Elise Caron visited in 2018, expecting to feel dread, but instead felt overwhelming calm. "It was like the house forgave me before I even knew what for," she wrote. She walked through the rooms, touching the walls as if reading Braille, and said each contact filled her with warmth, not heat, but familiarity. Later that night, she dreamed of standing in the courtyard, surrounded by faceless figures dressed in white. None spoke, yet she woke with tears on her cheeks and the faint smell of sea salt in her hair. She returned to France and published a paper titled "Memory as Sanctuary," arguing that the house no longer serves as a site of horror, but of reconciliation, a place where past suffering transforms into silence. Many disagreed, accusing her of romanticizing tragedy, yet others felt she'd touched something real. The idea spread among spiritual pilgrims who began leaving white flowers at the doorway, not as offerings of fear, but gratitude. Strangely, since that year, reports of disturbances decreased. Even the locals noticed the change. They say the house seems to rest easier now, its windows reflecting sunlight instead of absorbing it. Perhaps, as Elise suggested, the house is not haunted by the dead, but haunted for them, a monument that remembers so they no longer have to. Despite its calm exterior today, the Casa das Sete Mortes remains a mirror, reflecting whatever those who enter carry within. A psychologist from Rio de Janeiro, Dr. Helena Duarte, conducted an experiment in 2020 involving 10 volunteers of different beliefs. Each was asked to spend 1 hour alone in a different room to write their sensations afterward. The results were astonishingly personal. The atheist described a pulsing sadness that felt like prayer, while the devout Catholic saw flashes of light in the shape of wings. A candomblé practitioner reported hearing her own mother's voice calling her home. None of them experienced the same phenomena, yet all described the exact moment the air grew heavy at 47 minutes, an invisible threshold where the house seemed to take notice. Dr. Duarte theorized that the building acts as a psychological resonator, amplifying emotion the way an instrument amplifies vibration. "It's not the dead speaking," she said. "It's our own histories reflected back to us." Yet, even she admitted that something beyond comprehension lingers there. On her last night of research, she recorded faint singing on her microphone. 7 voices, harmonizing softly, the melody ancient and wordless. When she played the recording later, the sound was gone. Only static remained, punctuated by 7 rhythmic clicks. Whether coincidence or communication, no one can say. After that, she closed her study, but continued to light a candle every 7th of March, the date of the house's original tragedy. Respect, she told colleagues, is another form of data. If you believe that places can echo human emotion, share this story, because sometimes the ghosts we meet are our own reflections. By now, the Casa das Sete Mortes has transcended mere legend. It has become language. Locals use it as metaphor. A secret unspoken is another room in the 7 deaths. A mistake repeated is walking the 7th stair. The house has entered poetry, graffiti, even song lyrics whispered in samba circles. Its name carries weight, not of fear, but reverence. Each retelling reshapes it slightly, yet the essence remains. A story about memory refusing erasure. Tour guides, though forbidden from entering, still gesture toward it with lowered voices, as if introducing an old ancestor whose name must be spoken carefully. Academics debate its symbolism. Some call it colonial trauma embodied in architecture. Others, a collective haunting that keeps Salvador honest about its past. The truth is that the house serves both roles, a wound and a witness, a cathedral built of regret and resilience. Standing before it, one feels time curve inward. The present folds into the past until both become one continuous breath. And maybe that's the real meaning of the 7th death. The death of separation itself, the merging of story and storyteller, the realization that what we fear is only what we have not yet forgiven. The Casa das Sete Mortes, then, endures not as a curse, but as a mirror to the living city, a reminder that the past never disappears. It merely waits for us to return and listen. As dawn rises over Salvador, the Casa das Sete Mortes stands quiet, wrapped in the blue haze of early light. Birds perch on its eaves again, tentative but unafraid. The city stretches awake below, vendors setting up stalls, church bells ringing, the smell of coffee and salt in the air. And yet, in the moment before the sun touches the facade, a shadow seems to linger just a little too long along the upper gallery, like a memory reluctant to leave. Some say that's the priest's spirit, still keeping his morning vigil. Others think it's the house itself blinking, caught between dream and waking. For centuries, it has watched Salvador change. Colonies fall, empires rise, slaves freed, nations reborn. And through it all, the house remains, steady as conscience. Perhaps it was never about 7 deaths, but 7 transformations, 7 times the city shed its skin. In that sense, the house isn't haunted, it's alive with remembrance. Tourists may photograph its walls, historians may catalogue its facts, but those who live nearby know better. They greet it like a friend, too old to surprise, yet too mysterious to fully trust. And in that relationship lies the real story. Not horror, but coexistence, the long truce between life and what came before it. If you think some places survive because they choose to remember when we forget, like and share. This story breathes every time it's told. Still, there are nights when the balance shifts, when wind rises from the bay carrying the scent of rain and candle smoke. Those who pass the street then say the lamps dim and a soft hum seeps from the house's stones. It isn't frightening, just impossibly ancient, like the earth exhaling. A guard stationed nearby once said he saw faint lights gliding through the courtyard, as if someone were walking with lanterns under the floor. He refused to investigate, saying, "Whatever lives there knows the way better than I do." Scholars call these moments residual manifestations, but the locals use a simpler word, lembranza, remembrance. Maybe the house mourns the silence it's kept, or maybe it celebrates it. Either way, its presence reminds Salvador that some stories aren't told to be solved, they're told to be kept alive. Each retelling feeds the pulse beneath its foundation. Each curious visitor adds another heartbeat to its rhythm. The Casa das Sete Mortes doesn't demand belief, it asks for acknowledgement. Look at it too long, and you might see your own reflection in its shuttered windows, not clear but doubled, as if the house offers back the version of you that listens to the dark. And once you've seen that reflection, it never quite leaves you. It lingers, counting softly in your dreams. There's a legend, whispered only by the oldest residents, that the seventh death has yet to happen. They say the house waits for one last life to complete its tally. A visitor who will enter not out of fear or curiosity, but understanding. This person, they claim, will hear the final secret spoken in the courtyard at exactly the hour when the first light touches the tiled floor. The secret is not a name, not a confession, but a truth about the city itself. A truth too heavy for one era to bear. Until that moment, the house remains half awake, echoing every step that dares cross its threshold. Some believe this prophecy came from an 18th century monk who dreamt of a house that would never finish dying. Others dismiss it as another story designed to keep people from disturbing sacred ground. But prophecy or not, the notion persists, woven into Salvador's psyche like a forgotten hymn. For every ghost story told in the bars of Pelourinho, there's someone who listens and whispers, "It's not over yet." Maybe that's what makes the Casa das Sete Mortes so powerful. It's not the past it preserves, but the expectation of an ending that never comes. Like the sea, it pulls at you, patient, rhythmic, eternal. And perhaps, when someone finally listens deeply enough, the seventh death won't be a death at all, but a release, a sigh from stone, a house finally allowed to rest. If you think some stories keep living because they haven't found their ending, follow this one. The seventh death might be closer than we think. Now the house stands in the heart of Salvador like a heartbeat beneath layers of history, quiet but constant. Its walls no longer scream, they hum softly, remembering. Tourists pass, guides whisper, scholars debate. But the Casa das Sete Mortes endures, neither alive nor dead, existing in that fragile in-between where myth and truth intertwine. It has become more than a house, more than legend. It is a vessel for memory itself, holding centuries of fear, guilt, prayer, and forgiveness in its foundation. To stand before it is to feel the city's pulse beneath your feet. To understand that no story truly ends while someone still listens. Perhaps the seven deaths were never about bodies at all, but about the slow resurrection of understanding. 7 ways humanity learns to look at its own shadow. The house reminds us that every place has its ghosts, and that some ghosts are simply history refusing to be silent. And as the sun sets once more over the Bay of All Saints, its light catches the windows just so, and for a heartbeat, they seem to gleam, not with menace, but with knowing. The house exhales. The city breathes with it. And somewhere beyond time's reach, the count begins again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. and a silence that will never quite be empty. If you've walked with this story until now, share it, because every listener keeps the house alive, and every retelling becomes its next heartbeat.